The Supreme Court finally rules on the emotional issue of abortion.
This decision, which I hold in my hand, is dangerous, it's divisive, and it could be deadly.
The court is sending a very clear signal to the states that we can introduce legislation which will protect the children.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Sitting in tonight, Barry Seraphin.
Good evening. Today's long-awaited last-minute ruling by the Supreme Court did not topple the landmark Roe versus Wade decision that legalized abortion 16 years ago. But it did grant states broad new authority to limit the right to abortion. And the court set the stage for further challenges. One justice today called abortion the most politically divisive legal issue of our time. And forces on both sides of that issue are predicting new battles across the country. Today's ruling declared key provisions of a Missouri law constitutional and said that all states may now do what Missouri has done. If the life of the mother is not involved, they can pass a law saying no public employee can perform an abortion. No state money can be used to give advice or counsel about an abortion. And no public hospital may be used for an abortion. In addition, states may order doctors to perform tests to determine if a fetus is capable of surviving outside the womb. More on what the justices said and why from ABC's law correspondent, Tim O'Brien.
Ladies and gentlemen, Webster.
The Webster decision, the most anxiously awaited ruling of the decade. The press room at the Supreme Court erupted. And when the dust had settled, a major setback for abortion rights was obvious. The court declined to overrule Roe versus Wade, the 1973 landmark decision guaranteeing the right to an abortion, but it reinforced the right of all states to sharply regulate it. Chief Justice William Rehnquist said the states do not have to subsidize abortion or even abortion counseling, that the procedure may be banned in any facility receiving state funds. In Rehnquist's words, the Constitution confers no right to government aid. Most of the 1.5 million abortions performed in the U.S. each year don't involve government aid, but today's ruling may open the door to new restrictions on them as well.
I suppose state legislatures are going to be encouraged to pass yet other test statutes and see just how far the Supreme Court will let them go.
Justice Harry Blackmun, the author of Roe versus Wade, dissented passionately. I fear for the future. I fear for the liberty and equality of millions of women. I fear for the integrity of and public esteem for this court.
Roe v. Wade is alive in name only. The fundamental principle of Roe v. Wade, that women should be able to decide whether and when to have a child, when to end a pregnancy, that principle survives as a hollow shell.
Justice Scalia said the court should have completely overruled Roe today. Justices Kennedy, White, and Rehnquist wanted to water it down, arguing that even in the first 3 months of pregnancy, a woman's right to privacy must be balanced against the state's interest in protecting potential life. On that point, Justice O'Connor refused to go along, saying modifying or overruling Roe was not necessary to decide the Missouri case.
She's the absolute vital player whose decision will determine whether Roe survives only one more year or has more than 1 year to live.
Moments after today's ruling was announced, the court said it would review 3 new abortion cases next term. Court scholars say these new cases are even more likely to doom Roe versus Wade. Tim O'Brien, ABC News at the Supreme Court.
Only one side was declaring victory after today's ruling, but both sides were declaring war. Those opposed to abortions were promising to push for restrictive legislation across the country. Those who favor the right to abortion were promising to resist restrictions, which they say would make it impossible for poor women to get abortions. More from Carol Simpson.
Hundreds of demonstrators on both sides of the abortion issue gathered outside the Supreme Court. One of the first people out of the courtroom with news of the ruling was Randall Terry, head of the anti-abortion group called Operation Rescue.
They upheld the entire Missouri statute. Amen. But would not overturn Roe.
But it took a more careful reading of the language in the decision to determine what it all meant. A clear victory for anti-abortion forces.
That is a major breakthrough for the rights of the unborn child in this United States. And we are smiling and we're thumbs up all the way. This is what we were hoping for.
And this is what those who support the right of all women to have an abortion feared.
Okay, but I think it opens up the door to every state legislature to become far more restrictive And I personally think it's war against women, and we will respond accordingly.
Among those reacting to the ruling were the two women who were crucial to the historic 1973 Roe versus Wade decision. Sarah Weddington, who argued for the constitutional right of women to get an abortion, and Norma McCorvey, the so-called Jane Roe, who was the subject of the case.
I'm stunned and heartsick. I've worked on this for 20 years, and I knew there was a possibility the court would modify Roe versus Wade. I had no idea that it would be such a dramatic change.
Well, poor women are going to be suffering again as they were before the 1973 decision.
Across the nation, the telephone lines of radio talk shows were jammed by callers who either wanted to praise or denounce the high court.
And it terrifies me and it infuriates me that the government believes that it is their place to decide for me what I can and cannot do with my body.
I, as a taxpayer,
Yes.
don't think I should have to pay for another woman's abortion.
Supporters of abortion rights were out in force today, vowing to make what they called their silent majority an increasingly vocal one. Today's Supreme Court ruling is once again igniting the national debate on abortion, a debate which promises to grow more heated than ever. Carol Simpson, ABC News.
One of the pro-life movement's most vocal supporters did not react in person today. President Bush let someone else speak for him. ABC's Britt Hume is in Kennebunkport, Maine.
The president was spending this July 3rd just the way countless other vacationers were, trying to do the impossible.
Oh, wrong side. Darn it.
The president had delegated the delicate task of reacting to the abortion decision to Chief of Staff John Sununu, who later read a statement in the president's name.
We welcome this decision. By upholding the Missouri statute, the court appears to have begun to restore to the people the ability to protect the unborn.
Yes, Sununu was quick to say the president still supports a constitutional amendment to outlaw abortion. But he suggested today's decision, combined with those still to come from this court, may make that unnecessary.
And I think that the president's position is that whether it's done incrementally or whether it is done one fell swoop with a constitutional amendment, the basic thrust of the Roe v. Wade decision ought to be reversed, and he is pleased at any step, including this one, that moves in the right direction.
The administration would no doubt prefer to see Roe versus Wade undone by the Supreme Court itself. That would get the issue out of Washington and into the state legislatures without the president first having to push a constitutional amendment through a Congress controlled by the other party. Britt Hume, ABC News, Kennebunkport, Maine.
When we come back, more on the abortion ruling, the reaction in the Missouri clinic where it all started, and what it says about testing the unborn.
This is World News Tonight with Peter.
The Webster case is shorthand for its more formal name, case number 88605, Webster versus Reproductive Health Services. Webster is William Webster, Missouri's Attorney General. Reproductive Health Services is the abortion clinic in St. Louis that fought the Missouri law. ABC's Mike Von Friend was there today.
Reproductive Health Services is the largest abortion clinic in the Midwest, and today its staff watched as the decision was announced.
Chaos, absolute chaos.
Judith Whitacombe is the clinic's founder.
This is literally the beginning of war. And this is going to become our Vietnam of the 90s. The people will take to the streets. The people will make their voices known.
Missouri Attorney General William Webster, who defended the state's position before the court, says Missouri is now free to pass sweeping abortion restrictions.
Power is returned to the states, and I think you'll see it in informed consent, parental consent, waiting periods, hospitalization, and in a lot of other statutes that we've passed.
Missouri's overwhelmingly pro-life legislature is certain to pass such laws, but until it does, the only immediate impact of today's decision will be an end to abortions at the one public hospital in the state which still does them. The court's decision does not restrict reproductive health services. It receives no federal or state funds. Women come here from across the Midwest because it performs abortions regardless of a woman's ability to pay.
We'd like to shut down reproductive health and other clinics, and I don't see any reason for them to exist.
We will thrive and we will survive.
To survive, the clinic depends on donations. Its officials say today's ruling may help fundraising so it can offer an abortion to every woman wanting one. Mike Von Fremd, ABC News, St. Louis.
As we've said, the immediate effect of today's ruling is to let every state do what Missouri has done. And one pro-life advocate immediately promised what he called an avalanche of new legislation to limit abortions. What are the prospects? An ABC News analysis shows the battle too close to call in most of the states, 27 in all. Pro-choice forces appear to have the most political strength in 11 states. The pro-life forces appear to have the upper hand in the rest, a total of 12 states. Missouri's neighbor, Illinois, is one of them. Here's ABC's Chris Bury.
Today's ruling signals a green light for State Representative Penny Pullen. She leads the drive for new Illinois laws to regulate abortion.
Gives us back a little bit of sovereignty, apparently, and that's good news for state legislators.
But the news is grim for Representative Barbara Curry, the legislature's leading advocate of abortion rights.
The signal from this court is that it will be prepared down the line directly to overrule the principles established in Roe versus Wade.
Legislators here have routinely approved anti-abortion laws only to have them struck down by federal courts. But today's ruling is expected to invite new legislation that is more restrictive than Missouri's law.
What's likely to come now are regulations involving consent requirements by parents for minors, husband consent requirements, perhaps waiting periods.
Even before that, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on an Illinois law that lower courts found unconstitutional. It would require private abortion clinics to keep the same expensive equipment and staffing as major hospitals.
It drives those abortion clinics out of business.
The right to life of unborn children perhaps should be a matter that states can control.
In the past, anti-abortion lobbyists here have outmaneuvered their opposition, but today's decision sets the stage for a bitter political fight.
Both sides will pull out all stops and proceed as if this is perhaps the battle of the decade.
The two sides agree on very little but this. Abortion will now become a dominant factor in every campaign for every seat in the State House. Chris Bury, ABC News, Chicago.
And that political debate will involve medical questions. If a fetus is believed to be more than 20 weeks old, the Missouri law requires doctors to perform tests to see if the fetus is viable, if it can survive outside the womb. What kind of tests and what do they show? Here's ABC's George Strait.
Doctors use two basic tests to determine if a fetus can survive outside the womb: a sonogram, or actual picture of the developing fetus inside the uterus, and amniocentesis, which involves sticking a long needle into the uterus and removing some of the fluid there to determine how developed the lungs are. The court says the states can now require these tests when the fetus is 20 weeks old, but gynecologists say that's too early to determine viability.
Amniocentesis can only detect fetal lung maturity beyond 34 weeks of pregnancy, so to suggest that someone could use it to determine viability at 20 or 24 weeks is really absurd.
While such tests may not prove fetal viability until late in the pregnancy, some of these premature babies do survive, but 20 weeks is too young. Experts say 23 to 25 weeks is the cutoff. The obstacles these babies must overcome outside the womb are enormous. Their skin is too thin to ward off infection. Their veins are so delicate they leak, causing bleeding and strokes, and their lungs are so immature and stiff they can't expand and contract to breathe. Patrick Moran is one of the few to survive. He spent only 23 weeks in his mother's womb instead of the normal 40.
As far as his health goes, he seems to be fine.
Breakthroughs in neonatal technology saved him, but that technology can only go so far.
But at some point, all the hardware in the world isn't going to do the job. I think we're close to it now.
Half of the babies who spend only 23 to 25 weeks in the womb are born severely handicapped. And even though the court suggests that some might survive after only 20 weeks, experts say that's unlikely anytime soon. George Strait, ABC News, Dallas.
We'll have more on the court's abortion ruling later this evening on a special expanded edition of ABC News' Nightline. In a moment, another controversial court decision, this one on state-sponsored religious displays. And later in the